Self-deception is an interesting phenomenon. It's a process in which an individual rationalizes away a known truth and willingly accepts an alternate falsehood as if it were actual truth. There are a variety of explanations for falling victim to this form of deception, such as fear, personal bias, or outright denial. But peer or other social pressures can be significant influences as well. And such is the situation in which Adam found himself when Eve handed him a piece of fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Adam may have reacted to a form of social dynamics or peer pressure. He may have thought, even though I know what God said, and I know the truth, my peer did it, so it must be okay. I'm Dr. Rich Masek, the author of Ideolatry, God is Not Your Problem. And today we will consider our tendency toward self-deception. Adam was created first, and God gave him instructions about taking care of the garden. Then God told him not to eat fruit of a particular tree. Eve was then created out of him to become an equal partner. In light of this, it would seem clear that Adam had the responsibility to clearly communicate God's instructions to his new partner. But Eve told the serpent that not only were they not to eat the fruit of the tree, they were not even allowed to touch it. This was clearly incorrect, and since Eve added to the instructions that God gave to Adam, it's apparent that Adam was remiss in his responsibility to clearly communicate God's words to Eve. However, the fact remains that Eve was deceived, but Adam was not. Once the deed was done, and both Adam and Eve had ingested the fruit, the time of reckoning was upon them, as we see in Genesis chapter 3, verse 11, from the Bible in Basic English, when God asked Adam, "Have you taken of the fruit of the tree which I said you were not to take?" The blame game began as Adam pointed the finger of fault directly at God and at his mate Eve in Genesis chapter 3, verse 12. And the man said, "The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I ate." Adam had convinced himself that his desire to follow his wife was right. This social or peer pressure rose to a higher level of truth than God's words to him. And it's clear that Adam did not want to accept his responsibility or accountability to God. He basically said, "Hey God, you gave her to me, she told me to eat it, and I simply followed her instructions. So it's really your fault." His self-deception allowed him to blame everyone but himself. In Genesis chapter 3, verse 13, the spotlight turned to Eve as God said, "What is this you have done?" The woman said, "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." The woman was quite truthful and accurate in her reply to God. She didn't blame the man or God, as the man had done, but she didn't accept responsibility either. Eve allowed a different kind of self-deception to overtake her. She knew the truth of what God had said to Adam, but rationalized that truth through misrepresentation and lust for something that she didn't have. The man, the woman, and the serpent all suffered the consequences of their actions. God plainly told them that the penalty for eating of the fruit of the tree was death. And he was legally obligated to allow their deaths to occur, otherwise he would contradict his own word. The curses that Adam and Eve would endure were a direct legal result of their self-deception and sin, not God's action. Adam and Eve were now changed. They stepped into a different level, one that they immediately began to regret. Do you remember the first time you realized that you did something wrong, or saw something you wish you'd never seen? Once it's done, it can't be undone. For Adam and Eve, their self-deception overcame them, and there was no going back on their sin. Their sin separated them from God, and their innocence was lost forever. I invite you to read Ideolatry and explore this thread of self-deception, man's responsibilities, and God's plan for restoration. And please join me for the next episode when we see the progression of sin that culminates in the first murder.